Hi everybody. In this video, I want to go over the science of reading and talk about reading disabilities, including dyslexia. First, the science of reading. And this is something that's going to come throughout your textbook, but I want to give a brief overview here just in case your textbook hasn't gotten to it yet. I also want to editorialize just a smidge. The science of reading is the hot new thing over the past several years. One of my good friends is a reading intervention teacher in another state, and we went to undergraduate together, and I was talking to her about the science of reading more or less at the time I came to DSU, or probably like a year later when I started teaching some more literacy classes. And I said to her, I keep reading about the science of reading. I'm looking at these overviews of it, and I don't get it. How is this different than what you and I were taught back in the 90s when we were undergrads together? And she laughed at me and said, it is not different at all, Carl. They've just slapped a different name on it. The science of reading is not new. Um, it is what good teachers have been taught for decades and what good teachers have done for decades. It has been repackaged under this name and it's been given this scientific label because, particularly when it started, STEM was the big hot thing, I think. Um, but in reality, the science behind the science of reading is not new, and the ideas of it are also not new. Here are the five big ideas, five components that together form reading ability. And they are phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. We're going to talk about all of these things in this video, particularly focused on students who might struggle in one or more of them. I want to remind you that the reason you're taking this course is that all teachers are teachers of reading. It doesn't matter what your subject area is. All teachers are teachers of reading. And we know more, as we learn more about reading, one thing we recognize is that sometimes reading skills that we used to think students would have, if not by the middle of elementary school, certainly by the end of elementary school, they actually don't. And so, and those of you who are teaching probably see this. Students need to continue to develop their reading skills throughout high school. At least some students do. And arguably all students do, but some students need to do so in a more basic manner. So some terminology. Traditionally, the phrase reading disorder or sometimes reading disability was the preferred phrase in education. I still prefer that phrase. Dyslexia comes from the world of medicine. And again, in the past 10 years or so, dyslexia has become once more popular. It was popular back in the 80s for a while, and then it kind of fell out of fashion. And now all of a sudden it's in fashion again. And I have grave concerns about that. And I'm not going to editorialize too much about that in this video for the sake of time, but be aware this is not settled. These are not all settled facts. Let me just say that. Dyslexia is associated with various neurological impairments, in other words, learning disabilities. The phrase dyslexia, again, is seen increasing use once more in education. Not all reading disorders, not all reading disabilities are dyslexia. Not everyone who struggles with reading has dyslexia. Furthermore, dyslexia does not simply mean, oh, they see letters backwards. That's not true. That's not a definition of dyslexia. So let's go back to some of the things talked about in the science of reading. One is something that is a little bit broader than sometimes talked about. And that is what I'm calling phonological awareness, and it's not my invention. I mentioned phonemic awareness a few slides ago. Phonemic awareness is part of phonological awareness. Phonological awareness means the ability to recognize and manipulate spoken sentences and words. It's all about oral language. It's not about written language. And that includes rhyming words: cat, bat, hat, duck, luck, muck, other uck words. It includes things like alliteration in spoken language. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. That's not just a tongue twister, it's alliteration because that initial p sound keeps repeating. It's being able to understand word boundaries, by segmenting a sentence into words. If you've studied a foreign language, this is often a struggle for foreign language learners. It's certainly a struggle for me. I can recognize the words when they are written, but I cannot recognize them, except maybe the first and the last word of a sentence when it's spoken in some of the languages I've tried to study. It's being able to identify the syllables of a spoken word. And it's being able to blend and segment onsets and rhymes. So let's mention briefly onsets and rhymes. For a rhyming word, the onset is the non-rhyming part. In other words, it's the initial sound. And that initial sound might be a single sound, like a single consonant. So in the examples, that would be, for example, the B sound in band, the L sound in land, the GR. And so those are individual consonants. It could also be what we call consonant blends, two consonants together that they still keep their own sounds, but they blend together. So the gr in grand and the blah in bland are consonant blends. There's others too that we don't need to worry about for our purposes here. And then the rhyme, notice how it's spelled R-I-M-E, is the part that rhymes, R-H-Y-M-E-S. So in those examples, band, land, grand, and bland, it is the and that is the rhyme, R-I-M-E. That is the rhyming part. The onsets of those words are the B sound, the L sound, the GR sound, and the BL sound. So not great captions there. Last two, the GR sound in grand and the BL sound together in bland. A little better. So specifically with a reading disorder, you may see students who struggle with phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is a subset. It is a part of phonological awareness. And again, it is still talking about spoken language. But it's focusing on the smallest unit of sounds in a language. It is essentially, ignore this part where I say sound symbol awareness. I need to fix that. I'm going to get rid of that right now. So again, we aren't worried with symbols here yet. This is still oral language, and it's being able to break down a word into its phonemes. I'm going to talk about phonemes in a minute. It is being able to, in other words, identify and manipulate sounds that are in an individual word. One way is to blend sounds together. If you ever watch Sesame Street, that is something that Sesame Street tends to do. Ka, a, t, cat. And I see my closed captions went away. All right, let me restate that for the purposes of closed captions. It is breaking down words into their phonemic parts, their sound parts, and it's identifying and manipulating sounds within words. One way to do that is to blend sounds together. You've seen Sesame Street. At least they used to when I was a child, do that. So something like k, a, t, cat. H, a, t, hot. Sh, I, p, ship, and so on. Though it's blending sounds together into a word. It's also the opposite. It is segmenting, taking a word, cat, and breaking it apart. Oh, cat is k, a, t. The K sound, the short A sound, and the T sound. It is also deleting sounds. Take cat, delete the first sound. What do you have? Now I have at. It's also substituting sounds. Take the word band, B-A-N-D. Replace the the B sound, with a S, an S sound. Now instead of band, we have sand. So being able to do those things in oral language is phonemic awareness. And again, this is oral language, not written language. Phonics is where this turns into written language. Phonics is reading instruction that's focused on the connections between sounds and symbols. We often talk about sound symbol relationships. So in the word sand, that S, that symbol S, makes a S sound, makes an S sound. But in the word boxes, the S there doesn't make an S sound, it makes a Z sound. We say boxes, not boxes. Um, so it is those connections between symbols and the sounds that they represent. It's also focused related to that on spelling patterns. So I promised you a vocabulary lesson. Here it is, a phoneme. I know those of you who are English majors know this, and many others know this too, but just to review, a phoneme is the basic unit of sound in a language. These words that you're going to see have 3 phonemes each. Bat has 3 phonemes, the B sound, the short A sound, and the T sound. Ship also has 3 phonemes, the sh sound and the sh sound is what's called. Do we still have closed captions? Yes, good. The sh sound in ship is what is called a digraph. A digraph is when 2 letters combine to make a new sound. The sh sound in ship is not an S and an H pushed together. That would be the sound like you would hear if you said cat's hats really quickly. Cat's hats, cat's hats, cat's hats. That's not a sound, right? That's this the S and the H really close together. So sh is a new sound. That's a consonant digraph. And then we also have the short I sound represented by I and the P sound represented by P. The word home, 4 letters, but again, 3 phonemes, 3 sounds. The H sound, the long O sound, and the M sound. English has around 43 phonemes. It depends on your dialect of English. Some dialects have a few fewer phonemes, maybe closer to 40. Some have a few more, maybe closer to 46. But English has around 43 or 44 phonemes, different sounds. But there are 26 letters in the English alphabet. And some of those letters, like Q, don't stand for a sound of their own. So we have relatively few letters to try to represent around 43, 44 sounds. That's most famous with our vowels, right? The letter A could represent a what in English calls a short A sound, like in the word hat, or a long A sound, like in the word hate, but it also makes the A sound in father. Um, it also makes the schwa sound in about. So that letter A represents multiple sounds, including some that I haven't gone into that they're a little more technical. Similarly, we have sounds that don't so those different sounds of A don't all have their own letter. Similarly, digraphs like the sh sound in ship or the ch sound in church don't have their own letters. That's similar for example, we have 2 th sounds. If you say the word the and then you say the word 3, the th in the is actually pronounced differently than the th in 3. Th versus hard. I know that's hard to hear on a recording. So the sort of thicker one, the one that is easier to hear in the or in that or in mother, that is called a voiced th sound. And the one that's harder to hear, like in the word thistle or in the word threat, is a voiceless th sound. I'm not sure why threat to not. It probably doesn't like the word threat. That's interesting. But anyway, and again, that's a sound that actually used to have a letter in English. It did back in Old English, but it doesn't anymore. Anyway, so those are phonemes, and so that's one of the issues with phonics in English is that we have 43 or 44 sounds, give or take, but we only have 26 letters to represent them. So again, some examples of manipulating phonemes. We could remove the S from stop to get top, identify what letter makes the B sound in cab, again, blend sounds together in written language, and breaking words down into their component sounds using written language. So phonemes could be manipulated just in oral language, but they can also be manipulated in the combination of oral and written language. And being able to use phonics is a key part of word identification. Word identification also means, and oftentimes if you just see word identification, like if you see something that's talking about phonics and word identification often means decoding or sounding out, figuring out words that don't follow the guidelines of phonics. And English has many of those words. Now, they don't have as many as is popularly imagined, but they do have quite a few. For example, island, right? That S is silent for no good reason. Boot versus book. Both cases, we have two O's followed by a consonant. In both cases, those O's make a different sound. Break versus meet. Again, we have an EA together in really similar words in terms of the letters around them. They're surrounded by consonants, but they make completely different sounds. And my favorite word that doesn't reflect guidelines is of, which looks like it should be spelled UV. This does not mean that there's no order to English phonics or spelling. In fact, there's quite a bit of order. But particularly when it comes to vowels, there is also a lot of variation. And that is a struggle for students with different types of reading disabilities. Another challenge is reading fluency. Fluency means you can read in an automatic fashion with appropriate speed and smoothness. Someone who is a fluent reader simply sounds like they're a good reader. Fluency is not the same as understanding. It's not the same as comprehension. We'll talk about that in our next part, in part 2. You will have some students who can read beautifully, but who don't understand what they read. That's for a variety of reasons. It doesn't mean they have a reading disability. It might just be too hard for them, or they might not have background knowledge. I'm not a science guy. I could probably, though, read a page in a physics textbook fluently, but I might not be able to explain with any degree of accuracy what I just read. Similarly, especially in languages that have closer relationships between sounds and symbols, it's sometimes easier to be a fluent reader and not understand. So I have friends, for example, who are better at Spanish than I am, who would use this as an example. And they would say, I could read a page of Spanish and I can pronounce all the words correctly on that page, but I do not know what I just read. My Spanish is not good enough to read it fluently. I would definitely struggle over some words, especially now. But it's something to keep in mind. Just because somebody is a fluent reader doesn't mean they're a good reader. But the opposite tends to be true. Most good readers are fluent readers. Now, that doesn't count readers who might have a speech issue like a stutter or something like that. But in general, most people who have strong comprehension, which we'll talk about in our next part, are fluent readers. So, students who struggle with reading fluency often um, often do have a reading disorder and they struggle with reading because of that. They put so much of their cognitive load into getting through the sentence, sounding out the words, that by the time they're at the end of the sentence, much less the end of the page, they don't remember the main idea anymore, even if it's information that is sort of that they have background knowledge for. So there's our overview. We will continue in part 2 as we talk about comprehension and a little bit more about dyslexia. Thanks for watching.